So I've got a few things to talk about today. One is Joe Biden and his recent interview where he's asked by the interviewer, have you taken the cognitive test that Trump has taken? So I'll show you that quick clip. It's only about a minute.
Mr. Vice President, your opponent in this election, President Trump, has made your mental state a campaign topic. And when asked in June if you'd been tested for cognitive decline, you've responded that you're constantly tested in effect because you're in situations like this on the campaign trail. But please clarify specifically, have you taken a cognitive test?
No, I haven't taken a test. Why the hell would I take a test? Come on, man. That's like saying before you got in this program, if you take a test where you're taking cocaine or not, what do you think, huh? Are you a junkie?
What do you say to President Trump, who brags about his test and makes your mental state an issue for voters?
Well, if he can't figure out the difference between an elephant and a lion, I don't know what the hell he's talking about. Did you watch that? Look, come on, man. I know you're trying to goad me, but I mean, I'm so forward looking to have an opportunity to sit with the president or stand with the president in debates. There's going to be plenty of time. And by the way, as I joke with him, I shouldn't say it. I'm going to say something I probably shouldn't say. Anyway, I am very willing to let the American public judge my physical and mental my physical as well as my mental fitness, and to make a judgment about who I am.
This is what we have now as the runners for the U.S. presidential campaign. We have somebody who you can tell there's problems there, and also the fact that he won't take a cognitive test is a worry, because it's a very simple cognitive test. And Donald Trump is boasting about taking the test and saying how difficult it was. I mean, you couldn't make this up. It's not that difficult, really. And Donald Trump just went on his YouTube channel today saying how Joe Biden is the most dangerous left president that could ever possibly be, left presidential nominee that could ever be. I mean, seriously, he says it's going to make America unsafe, basically. He said that he's going to make everybody unsafe. Well, Joe Biden is a Republican, really. Everything that he pretty much stands for, including his warmongering about, and of course that's a dual thing. The Democratic Party is a warmongering party too. But Joe Biden hasn't demonstrated anything particularly left about him. Now, it's just going to show you a quick clip of another amazing thing that sort of is just normal now, really, is the terrorizing of black people in the United States. And there's a family, I think it's a mother and 3 children, and they had them on the ground, and 2 of them were handcuffed on the ground, and for nothing, mind you, just being black. They were going to go out and do their nails, and they're all crying and screaming on the ground because they're terrified. And you don't see the lead up to them being handcuffed and being on the ground.
Hey, bud, if you're not involved, please step back for me. I just appreciate it.
Can I hold my sister next to me?
I'm going to get you moved up on your side, okay? No! Okay. You okay right now?
No! Can I hold my sister? Can I hold my sister next to me?
Can I get you guys off the ground?
Yes, I want to get off!
This is some bullshit. You have guns on that
Ma'am? I'm going to put that down on you to make sure you don't have any weapons. I'm not going to get you into the child, okay? Take him home and do something quick. Okay. You can go ahead and stand for me, okay? Just stay seated. Grab your little one, okay?
Can y'all get my auntie's phone so I can call my aunt?
We're going to take care of that.
But what on earth is wrong with these? I mean, really, you're either completely stupid and totally racist to do something like that, which we all know that the U.S. police have a huge white supremacist problem, a huge race issue, and the U.S. police have really come from the small militias when the country was founded by white supremacists, and those small militias used to put down uprising slaves and kill indigenous people and take their land, and then that became the KKK, and then that became the modern day police. Well, you can see, just the fact of doing this to 4 black young people, 4 black, most of them children, just shows the level of targeting that just goes on there. Can you imagine them doing that to 4 white people? I can't. Also, doing this after the George Floyd protests, and while they're still going on, even though that's become a much bigger issue than just George Floyd, but it's astounding that this is so ingrained. And of course, this is also a result of sending police over to Israel to be trained. Israeli occupational forces there, they actually train the police to do the knee on the neck and the various awful sorts of constraints that they do. So you've probably heard about the terrible explosion that happened in Beirut at the port, and there's been about 100 people killed and about 4,000 injured. And if you've seen that blast, that gives you a little idea of how devastating a nuclear bomb could be when this is actually, I don't know if it's thousands of tons of fertilizer that supposedly caught on fire. Interestingly, when that explosion happened, Kenneth Roth, who is from Human Rights Watch, who is a major U.S. imperialist promoter, he immediately blamed Hezbollah. And of course, Hezbollah is the Netanyahu wants to get rid of Hezbollah, and so it's not surprising if any promoters of U.S. imperialism immediately point to Hezbollah. That's just a matter of course. Ben Norton, the journalist, said billionaire-funded regime change lobby group Human Rights Watch is a total fraud. Its executive director, Kenneth Roth, just tried to blame the explosion in Beirut, Lebanon, on Hezbollah without any evidence at all, not a shred. When I heard that happen about this explosion, firstly, it's terrible to be so cynical now, but I just kind of felt like there was probably something nefarious had happened. And I don't know if that will turn out to be the case on further investigation, but I just immediately thought, I wonder if that is Israel doing on the behest of the United States. Because I think Lebanon was on the list of countries, those 7 countries, or was it 5 countries, or is it 7, that Wesley Clark talked about, that the US wanted to basically invade and take over. I think Lebanon was on that list.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who had used to work for me. And one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, No. He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They've just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran." And there's no question that the presence of petroleum throughout the region has sparked great power involvement. But there's always been this attitude that somehow we could intervene and use force in the region.
And I just immediately thought, when I heard of that massive blast, when I woke up to it, seeing this dreadful blast, and I just thought, wow, that's tremendous. How was that able to come about? How is it that there was so much of that fertilizer, sitting in that port, and how did it catch alight? I guess, that can happen organically. But I just wondered what on earth was so much fertilizer doing since 2014. And maybe there was something nefarious went on there to destroy basically their economy because it was already in free fall. So the port, they rely on so much going through that port. I think 75% comes through that port.
This amount of ammonium nitrate was allowed to be stored there when people knew about it. Other governments knew about it and did nothing about it. And people were talking to judges to pass a ruling to get this stuff out of there because it's dangerous, and nobody did anything. So therefore, the political shocks, the aftershocks, are really going to be, I think, the significant dimension of this beyond the humanitarian suffering that we're now seeing dealt with.
Now, and then you have Pompeo, the Secretary of State, calling not the current prime minister, but the previous prime minister.
Well, this is the ideological amateurism and ignorance of the American government being exhibited at the level of the highest political class in the White House and the State Department. These people don't care about Lebanon or the Arab world. They don't know anything about it. They're basically following a rule book that is dictated by internal American politics, linked heavily to fundamentalist Christian extremist skinheads who are very, very linked close to Israeli settler colonialists. And this is something that's been consistent for the last 3.5 years, and it will continue to be there. They're campaigning against Iran and Hezbollah, and anything that happens in Lebanon that's bad, they're going to link it to Hezbollah and Iran. And so this is predictable. It's amateurish. It falls into the realm of criminality and cruelty at the same time, and amateurism. So I would completely discard anything that Trump or Pompeo says about this. And the fact that they called Hariri not the prime minister or the president is fascinating, because they don't care about humanitarian suffering. 300,000 people have lost their homes. They don't care about that. All they want to do is talk to somebody in there who can link them, say, to the Saudis or the Emiratis, or somebody who can, help them push against Hezbollah and Iran. And the terrible irony is that this policy has only strengthened Hezbollah and Iran over the years. And the Lebanese people are not focused on that. They're focused on recreating a legitimate, credible, effective, and humanistic government system that treats its own citizens as human beings. In the last 24 hours, saying we need an international investigation. We cannot leave this in the hands of the Lebanese government. Some members of parliament have already said they're going to resign. And people are asking for not only an international investigation, but immediately to detain the port officials and other officials who knew about this, detain them preemptively, and then give them a fair trial when the investigation is done. But this is really the critical point now, the transition from the humanitarian catastrophe of the explosion, which we have to deal with for the next 2, 3, 4 weeks until things stabilize, the transition from that to a political reconfiguration of the Lebanese political system. That's the real aftermath of this explosion. And you see it in people saying, for instance, Lebanese saying, don't give aid money to the government. They'll steal it. They've stolen everything else. They're going to steal the aid money. Give aid money to the Lebanese Red Cross, to NGOs, to hospitals, but don't give it to the Lebanese government.
And Rania Khalek, the journalist Rania Khalek, who actually goes between the US and Lebanon. She has family in Lebanon. And she was actually staying in an apartment in Beirut when this happened. And fortunately, because everything is in such disarray, because the economy is in a terrible state already before the blast, and now it's going to probably ruin Lebanon. Rania Khalek, what I was saying about Rania Khalek is she was in this apartment. She was in this apartment when it happened, and I think the windows blew in. And I think she said she could have been really injured or worse had she been in there, except that they have frequent brownouts in Beirut. She left the building for some reason because of the brownout, and she said that might have saved her life. So, this is the state of things. It's a terrible thing. They're already struggling dreadfully, and now this happens. And I mean, if you have a look at the images around of of that area around, it's 11,000 square meters or something. I don't know. It's a large area around that has been completely devastated. Yasha Levine, who's a journalist as well, and he has a blog, which is an interesting blog, and he said, Americans can't see Trump as an American because it would mean looking critically at their own decaying society and the monsters that it creates. Americans have to project exotic beyond the border values onto him as if he's not really an American, but a foreign creation. Yes, and you could expand that to a lot of, it seems like there are a lot of people don't like Trump, not because of all the awful things he's doing, like the genocide in Yemen, and the like, killing Soleimani and all those different war crimes that he's committing. He's actually escalated and expanded the killings, the U.S. imperialist killings, he's expanded that. So they don't care about that. The Democratic Party doesn't care about that, and a lot of the fake liberals don't care about that. They only care about the fact that he is a crass, lurching, lumbering kind of monstrosity. He's not Obama, who was cool and groovy, yet Obama had dropped 100,000 bombs on Middle Eastern families and killed, many, many thousands of people. He'd also become the deporter-in-chief and was 2 million plus people he deported out of the U.S. The list goes on. He was funded by the health insurance industry, so he passed on Medicare for all. And the list goes on, and all that means, particularly black people not having any free health care. Obama was a real problem. And yet they want somebody like that looks like that sounds smooth, and that can be the head of the empire and do all these awful things in the background, but be presenting themselves as this nice guy. They all want a smooth operator as the front puppet. They don't care what they do in the background as long as it projects this sort of that we're a civilized society and we're eloquent and all that kind of thing. Meanwhile, they're doing the most abhorrent things, not only to people, black and brown people overseas, but they're doing horrific things to just in general now the population. And as you can see, the police are going to continue on terrorizing and killing black people at the point of 3 people a day being killed, I think, by the police. 3 people a day, and there's a high percentage of black people amongst that. Someone mentioned to me just today how the Ghana in Africa opened its borders to black people from the United States to return to Ghana or to settle in Ghana, and that was an open invitation. And it turns out that Ghana actually, I think they have free health care. You can buy a house there, a really big house, like a 4-bedroom, kind of almost like a bit of a mansion-y type thing, for about 200,000 Australian dollars, something like that, whereas it would be probably 5 times that much in the United States. They basically are actually, would be far better for somebody to live there and get sort of the free healthcare and all of that. The only problems they do have is, and there seems to be quite a few black people are moving to Ghana and have since 2000. The only problem, of course, is that they have malaria there, and I think there's about 8% of the population die of malaria each year, so that's a serious thing. There's also a tuberculosis problem there, and there's a high rate of HIV there. So the health issue is problematic, and so you'd have to really, the one in particular, of course, is malaria. So I'm not exactly sure how they're addressing that, but I mean, the other fact is, if you didn't want to be basically a target of the police and be killed just for being black, then that Ghana is definitely way better. Like one one black woman said,
to me, there's no such thing as a black woman in Ghana. I'm a woman in Ghana.
She said, in the United States, I'm an African American, and in Ghana, I'm just another woman. That's really sad to say, but yeah, it's true. And back to Rania Khalek and what she said on her Twitter feed, I think this is what she said. She said the Beirut port is an economic lifeline for Lebanon, a country experiencing a severe economic collapse. This explosion will bury the country. It hit the economic center, all major hotels, every single building in the city. Nothing was left untouched. It's just dreadful. Back to Trump. Speaking of Trump in how he's talking about his cognitive abilities and bragging about how he passed that cognitive test, he did, Victor Berger, who does these sort of satirical send-ups of various people, both sides, he did this little satire of Trump doing a speech about national parks, and Trump was calling Yosemite National Park. He didn't know how to pronounce Yosemite. He was going, Yo-Semites. It was, you really have to wonder. I don't know.
I want every American child to have access to pristine outdoor spaces. When they gaze upon the grandeur and the splendor of Yosemites, towering sequoias. Their love of country grows stronger. God's creation. This is truly God's creation. Lush forests, towering mountains, windswept and beautiful windswept prairies and precious wetlands and wildlife refuges. And this nation is a special nation. Yosemite refuges.
I just want to touch on China. I'm going to post something that I've found about China and the U.S. imperialist meddling in between 1945 and 1960. It's really just kind of outrageous. But Robbie Martin on Twitter was asking people, I'm genuinely interested in, Robbie Martin is part of Media Roots Radio, I'm genuinely interested in figuring out good strategies from anti-war and anti-imperialist people out there and how to push back against this anti-China escalation. It's very concerning to me, and I feel that most leftists and libertarians are totally unprepared on this issue. That's true. I think that's the case, actually. There doesn't seem to be much, and that I feel like there are people who are, because there's hardly any information, I feel like people are pushing, are focusing on the Uyghur situation, and there's a lot of propaganda about the Uyghurs and this, lots and lots, and then you get people. Now, I know I've mentioned this person, Vaush, before, because he did a little spiel about Tucker Carlson, which was good, but that, as I said at the time, I do not endorse the opinions, well, I don't endorse the opinions of anybody that I talk about on this channel, or the organizations, etc., because I don't know what they're going to say in the future or what they've said in the past. Also, some of the things they're saying presently, and that includes myself even on, what I might have said 10 years ago. I mean, everybody's a work in progress. But anyway, so Vaush has turned out to, I've done a bit more investigation into him, and he seems to be promoting anti-Chinese propaganda. He's also doesn't seem to have really much of a clue about socialism, about Marx.
Guys, just so you know, hey, speaking of reading theory, just so you fucking know, just so you realize, when Marx and following theorists wrote on capitalism, they were not writing, capitalism and liberalism are worst things to ever happen to humanity. They are greatest oppressor of workers. No. Marxism is supposed to be an extension of liberalism, not a rejection of it, a true promotion of unity, fraternity, and freedom, and liberty and shit. That's what Marxism and that's what leftism is about. It's about bringing the messaging of the liberal movement forward to make it better, to make it stronger, to make it true to its principles.
He's really just pushing the Democratic Party, and also seems to think that anybody who is outside of the mainstream media in the US, even he seems to think that they're sort of in some ways cahoots with with Russia or something like that. I mean, it's McCarthyite type stuff. He's got a few problems there, and that's really unfortunate because he's actually pushing the imperialist narrative, the U.S. national security state narrative on China, and he's pushing that for all he's worth. So that actually is really, really unfortunate. He's also a misogynist as well. There's a bunch of problems there. But anyway, he's pushing this anti-China narrative, anti-China imperialist narrative for all he's worth, and he's leading a whole bunch of young people up the garden path. I did a video a couple of weeks ago on on Vaush pushing and needing to actually look into independent media, and I'm surprised that he hasn't done that, which makes me wonder, really. I wonder if he's doing that in bad faith. He's doing that in a sort of a sinister way. I don't know. But I don't know. I'm not in his head, but I sort of feel like he's already aware of Michael Brooks, who was a leftist. And Michael Brooks has associations with all the different independent news, the independent media that I mentioned. So I'm not sure how he could miss out on finding out true information about China and also the U.S. national security state talking points. But it seems like he doesn't have a clue. So that's really unfortunate, and that's the problem when people are not hooked into, independent news, independent journalists. And it also is a problem when people who call themselves leftists and also who proclaim to be socialist, which he does. He actually calls himself a socialist anarchist, and yet he's actually really just a liberal who is pushing imperialist national security state talking points. And that's where you get this confusion by people, young people, who think that they're learning about leftist stuff when really they're not. And that's where you get to the Hill, the Hill pushing Rising, which is supported by a friend of Donald Trump's, and they're sort of conflating the left and the right populist movements together, when one side is actually, the right, has no interest whatsoever in minority groups and LGBT and black people. They don't care a toss about those groups, and yet the Hill Rising is conflating those two movements as if we all have commonalities. There's maybe a couple of commonalities, but that's about it, and the solutions are entirely different. So that's the problem when you've got all these different shows now and programs and YouTube influencers and all of that, who are confusing and conflating and also grifting. I think I really have to wonder about some of these people on YouTube who are really grifting to the right, because the right throws money at people who are sort of pushing their narrative in a way, or normalizing their narrative. So it's a worry, really, and it's depressing. When Robbie Martin says, we need a strategy, the people need to really really refrain. If they don't really understand what's going on, at worst, just say nothing. Say nothing about it if you don't know anything about it. I try to refrain from saying anything about the Vega situation. I've done some touching on it from the reports from the Grey Zone, and I've also looked into Adrian Zenz, who is one of the main promoters of the Uyghur genocide thing. And Adrian Zenz is a evangelical Christian who has some really wackadoo positions on lots of things. Look into it, Adrian Zenz, that character. And he's the one that is the main person, the main go-to from the mainstream media. And he's just a wackadoo. He really is. So, it's best for particularly those who are not grifting, right, to just, if we don't know anything about something, and we've been doing our best to try and find out the real story, the best thing to do is just not to say anything, and not to feed into the mainstream media narrative, which is trying to manufacture a war on China, trying to manufacture consent for a war on China. That's the best we can do, is not feed into that if we don't understand what's going on. There's so much of that now. It's just rabid anti-Chinese propaganda, which is not only leading to a war against a nuclear power. This is not like Afghanistan, where people are very poor and they've hardly got anything to fight against the US imperialist military. This is not like that, and that's bad enough. And Afghanistan still wins in the end, even though they, because they never give up. But the China is not that. It's not Afghanistan. China is not Iraq. China is a massive power economically, and it may not be as big militarily as the US, but it has nuclear power. It will be mutually assured destruction. And I want to put up this meme by John Pilger, his Twitter account put out. So John Pilger, he's basically telling it how it is. John Pilger says, "Another Hiroshima is coming unless we stop it now. This is a woman burned into the steps of a bank in Hiroshima by the atomic bomb on 6th of August 1945. Remember this when you don't speak up against the fanatic Pompeo lies about China, now leading us to war." And he shows this image of this shadow on the steps, which in Hiroshima was a common thing around the epicenter of the Hiroshima bomb and Nagasaki that was dropped by the US. The US have no problem dropping a nuclear bomb on tens of thousands of people and killing them. They have no problem with that. So I don't know why anybody would think they wouldn't have a problem with doing it again. And they have been dropping out of all the different nuclear treaties, and it makes it far more dangerous. And they're upping their provocations in the South China Sea against China. And the stupid Australian government, led by the authoritarian wannabe Scott Morrison, is going along with it, trotting along like an obedient vassal state that we are, with the US imperialist objectives, which is to have a war on China. So we really have to push back against this, because this is so dangerous, and it's also leading to violence against Asian people throughout the world. In the United States, I mean, every day in the United States, there's some Asian person is suffering because of this upping of the rhetoric, the xenophobic, racist rhetoric against Chinese people. People don't discriminate. If they see someone who looks Asian, they don't have to be Chinese. It's like when they were upping the xenophobic, Islamophobic rhetoric on Muslims, all sorts of people, Sikhs and all sorts of people were lumped into that. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say. So thanks for watching. My name is Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals for Vega. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Click the notifications bell. Otherwise, you don't receive notifications when I drop a video. Please click the content like button if you like the content. And always leave comments. I always enjoy your comments. And I hope to do another live stream of a very poorly played game, Morrowind. In the next, we had some technical difficulties when we tried to do that. And we were going to try and do that once a week or once every couple of weeks, just to sort of hang out with anybody on the channel who'd like to hang out for a little while. It won't be politics. At some point, I may include some politics in there, but it'll just be hanging out for a while. I hope you don't mind that I do that. I just sort of think it seems to be a popular thing to do now, and Morrowind is a nice game. And it's just nice to sort of hang out and not be sort of all heavy about something, just with people who are like-minded. So anyway, thanks for watching. Till next time. Bye for now.